WHGE 95.3 FM. Coming up, the Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Third Eye Optometrist, Patrice Gibbs, here to get that eye open. Yes, indeed. Every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. And we do that right here. All right, let me get my disclaimer out the way right quick. All right.
The views and opinions expressed on the Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. Let me get my mic right here. All right, let's get them started. All righty. Yeah. All right. Open Eye listeners have heard me talk about this extraordinary brother before. Okay. And the brother I'm talking about is Eugene Jacques Bullard. Yes, I'm an admirer. Now, one of my favorite movies, and some of you might find this surprising, and some of you that know me probably won't, okay, is Casablanca. And one of the things that I noticed in Casablanca are the similarities between the character played by Humphrey Bogart, Rick Blaine, and Eugene Jacques Bullard. I'll tell you about when real life outwrites Hollywood. Now, Rick Blaine, the character Humphrey Bogart played in Casablanca, which came out in 1942, has become one of the most iconic figures in American cinema. The cynical expatriate, the nightclub owner in occupied territory, the war-weary idealist, pretending not to care until history demands he choose a side. What most people don't realize is this: Eugene Jacques Bullard lived that story for real. He lived it with far higher stakes, fewer safety nets, and no closing credits. The expatriate who left America behind. Rick Blaine leaves the United States disillusioned, carrying emotional scars from political betrayal and lost causes. He settles in Casablanca insisting, "I stick my neck out for nobody." Eugene Bullard leaves America because it is actively trying to break his neck. Jim Crow, racial terror, and the violent policing of black ambition push him out of Georgia and into Europe, France becomes the place where his humanity is recognized. Rick leaves out of bitterness. Bullard leaves out of survival. The nightclub is a neutral ground. Rick owns Rick's Cafe Americain, a place where Nazis and refugees, spies and resistant figures drink under the same roof. It's presented as morally neutral until it isn't. Bullard owns L'Escadrille, a jazz club in Paris that becomes a gathering spot for German officers during the Nazi occupation. That was no movie. Like Rick, Bullard plays the part of the detached host, smiling, listening, letting the enemy feel comfortable. But just like Rick's Cafe, Bullard's club is a facade. Behind the bar, Bullard is listening. Behind the piano, he's remembering. Behind the smile, he's resisting. The reluctant hero who is never neutral. Rick famously claims neutrality, but when the moment comes, he chooses resistance, helping Victor Laszlo escape, sacrificing love for principle, and recommitting himself to the fight against fascism. Bullard never pretended neutrality. He had already fought fascism in World War I. In World War II, he became a real intelligence asset, passing information to the Free French resistance, knowing full well that discovery would mean torture or execution. Rick risked heartbreak. Bullard risked death. War, disillusionment, and moral clarity. Rick is a veteran of lost causes. Spain, Ethiopia, his idealism bruised but not dead. His art is about rediscovering moral clarity. Bullard doesn't need rediscovery. His clarity is forged early. He knows exactly who the enemy is because he fought them before with bullets, with wings, and with wounds that never healed. Rick finds his courage again. Bullard never lost it. The end in Hollywood wouldn't show. Casablanca ends with a legendary line and the promise of the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Rick walks into the fog with honor restored. Bullard's ending is harsher and more American. After 2 years, after 2 wars, after espionage, after medals from France, Eugene Jacques Bullard returns to the United States and is reduced to working as an elevator operator. No praise, no recognition, no gratitude. Rick becomes immortal on film. Bullard becomes invisible in life. Let me tell you about the uncomfortable truth. In Casablanca, where honest history, Rick Blaine would have been black and the studio would never have made the movie. Bullard wasn't allowed to be a myth in America because myths require permission, and America has always been reluctant to grant black men heroic narratives unless they are safely distanced, symbolic, or sanitized. France gave Bullard statues, medals, and memory. America gave him silence. Rick Blaine is a beautifully written fantasy of moral courage under occupation. Eugene Jacques Bullard is the truth that fantasy borrowed from and erased. One is celebrated as cinematic legend. The other is buried as historical footnote. And that difference tells you everything you need to know about who America chooses to remember and who it chooses to forget. Eugene Jacques Bullard. Say his name. It's the open eye. All right. situation here with this damn alarm. What up, y'all? I'm still with you. Hey, Steve. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. Oh, look, everybody. It's Will. If I took every global oral tradition and gave it an English accent, Shakespeare. The man history crowned as the voice of the human condition. When in reality, he was the greatest remix artist colonial Europe ever produced. Let's be honest. Shakespeare did not invent storytelling. He sampled it. He didn't live the experiences he wrote about. He didn't understand the cultures he borrowed from. He barely survived the politics of his own time. But history, written by empire for empire, knighted him anyway. Every tragedy, stolen. Every sonnet, loosely translated. Italian tales, Greek dramas, Persian allegories, African and Arabic poetic structure. They all run through a thesaurus dipped in horniness and repackaged for a white audience that had already burned or buried the originals. To be or not to be, he said, and they built monuments. Meanwhile, the Yoruba had already said, you must choose between the spirit and the shadow. One becomes a t-shirt, the other becomes a footnote. That's how colonialism works. Shakespeare is what happens when you give a mediocre playwright colonial access to everybody else's libraries, from Venice to Timbuktu, and then erase the receipts. Even his name sounds made up, Shakespeare. That's not a name, that's a brand. That's what a European calls himself after looting the world's imagination and calling it originality. He wrote kings into poetry, but couldn't write a woman without turning her into a ghost, a corpse, or someone crying in an iambic pentameter. Julia dies, Ophelia drowns, Desdemona suffocates, Lady Macbeth loses her goddamn mind. That's not depth, that's limitation. He wasn't the bard. He was the bootlegger of Babylon myths with better marketing. The colonial DJ spinning everybody else's records and taking all the credit. And the real crime isn't that Shakespeare wrote. The real crime is that Western education taught us he was the beginning. Instead of just another middleman in a much older, much darker theft. History didn't elevate Shakespeare because he was universal. It elevated him because empire needed a face for stolen genius. And we've been applauding the remix while forgetting the ancestors who composed the original. Quite the canon. Or question the canon. Interrogate the author and stop making colonial preservation for cultural supremacy. It's the Open Eye. All right. I want to tell, thank Jorge, the Vanguard. He a hard dude. Hey, Brother Lawrence. He a hard dude for that apt analysis of Shakespeare. I'm going to keep on in that vein. Okay? I'm going to tell you about the lie of discovery and the fraud of colonial genius. Let's get something straight right now. There's no such thing as European primacy of discovery. That lie was manufactured to justify conquest, theft, and erasure. What Europe calls discovery, the rest of the world calls rediscovery without credit. Let's start with their favorite costume model, Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. Leonardo didn't invent flight. The Chinese were engineering flying machines while Europe was still arguing about how many angels could sit on a church roof. Leonardo didn't invent hydraulics. Islamic engineers had already mastered water clocks, pumps, and pressure systems centuries earlier. He didn't invent anatomy. Arab physicians were performing surgeries with precision instruments while Europe was still bleeding people with leeches. And do we have to mention Imhotep, who invented those precise instruments thousands of years before? Leonardo's real innovation? Redrawing other people's work with prettier margins and a backward signature. His notebooks read like this: wander into a Muslim library, squint at schematics, copy them, add some swirls, and call it genius. Stolen optics? Check. Borrowed hydraulics? Check. Anatomical studies based on knowledge already developed elsewhere? Triple check. And the Mona Lisa? A glorified passport photo with a background he probably didn't even paint himself, looking like she knows damn well she's trapped in a fraud. Leonardo wasn't ahead of his time. He was surrounded by European amnesia and protected by global theft. All right. Now, I want to tell you, I really am a fan of Neil deGrasse. But Neil, the great research scientist and physicist you are, you need to do some more research, brother. Since Sir Isaac Newton, the patron saint of academic entitlement, is your favorite scientist. This man didn't invent gravity. Every civilization that ever dropped something already understood gravity. What Newton did was take ancient African, Indian, and Islamic mathematics, slap Latin on it, and say, mine. He wrote more about biblical numerology and alchemy than actual experiments, and prayed nobody brought it up at the Royal Society. His hair wasn't hair. It was a geographical strata, 3 eras of European delusion compressed into a keratin. You could carbon date those curls and find the exact year he decided calculus was too important to share until someone else started inventing it. Newton's whole vibe, his whole vibe was, I didn't steal it, I improved it. That's not genius. That's colonial methodology. And then there's Galileo Galilei, the Vatican's favorite telescope cosplayer. Galileo didn't invent the telescope. He didn't invent heliocentrism. He didn't discover Jupiter's moons in a vacuum. Islamic astronomers, especially Ibn al-Shatir, had already developed the mathematical models Galileo relied on. Andalusian manuscripts made his work possible long before he touched the lens. Galileo took one look through a spyglass and decided he invented seeing. And let's kill the myth right now. Galileo was not silenced for science. He folded. He had the chance to be a martyr for truth and instead folded like a lawn chair with scoliosis. Recanted like a kid caught cheating on a heliocentric exam. And no, he wasn't persecuted because he was right. He was punished. He was actually punished because he was arrogant and publicly roasted the Pope with a character literally named Simplicio. Excuse me. That wasn't scientific rebellion. That was 17th century Twitter behavior. The Galileo, the rebel narrative was assigned after his death by Enlightenment fanboys trying to retcon submission into swagger. The cosmos moved on without him. And here's the truth they don't want taught. Africans were building mathematically precise cities using fractal geometry while Europe was still figuring out how to divide a circle. Arabs had automata, surgical tools, which they got from Africans, optics, astronomy, and algebra, centuries before the Renaissance. China had engineering, flight concepts, printing, navigation, and mechanics, while Europe was still afraid of soap. Europe didn't lead the world. Europe looted the world, burned the libraries, killed the scholars, erased the names, and then declared itself the origin of every goddamn thing. That's what discovery means in colonial language. Yeah. We found it after we destroyed the people who already knew it. Leonardo, Newton, Galileo. They weren't gods. They were beneficiaries of global theft, standing on stolen civilizations, protected by empire, and crowned as geniuses because history was written by conquerors. See, this is the lie of supremacy. This is the fraud of primacy. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. The West didn't invent knowledge. It monopolized credit. This is the open eye. Hey, Holland. I see you there, bro. What's up, boy? Sister Sherry. All right. Let's keep it moving. WHGE 95.3 FM. Let me tell you something. All right. Nellie Fuller Jr.'s statement. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's not a slogan. It's a warning. Nellie Fuller Jr. said, if you don't understand white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else you understand will only confuse you. What Fuller is saying is this: white supremacy is not just prejudice or hate, it's a global system of power. And until you understand it as a system, your education, your politics, your religion, your economics, and even your history will feel fragmented, contradictory, and misleading. White supremacy is not primarily about individual white people being mean or racist. That's just the surface. The real issue is structure. It's a system designed to produce and maintain domination in economics, law, education, media, healthcare, housing, warfare, and knowledge itself. If you don't understand that, you'll think poverty is a personal failure instead of a policy outcome. You'll think crime is a moral defect instead of a predictable response to deprivation. You'll think schools are failing instead of being intentionally underfunded. You'll think prisons are about justice instead of social control. You'll think wars are about freedom instead of resource extraction. Without understanding white supremacy, contradictions pile up. You're told America believes in equality, yet inequality is permanent. You're told work hard and succeed, yet whole communities are locked out. You're told the law is neutral, yet outcomes are racially consistent. You're told history is over, yet the same power dynamics repeat. That confusion is not accidental. It is the system working as intended. White supremacy functions best when people argue about symptoms instead of causes. When we debate behavior but never policy, when we fight each other over scraps instead of questioning who controls the table, when racism is reduced to bad attitudes instead of examined as a codified operating system. Nellie Fuller understood something critical back in 1971. You can't solve a problem you refuse to correctly name. Until white supremacy is recognized as a global system of domination, every conversation about education, policing, housing, health, politics, war, religion, and economics will feel confusing, circular, and unsatisfying. Because you're trying to solve a structural problem with individual explanations. Once you understand how the system works, clarity replaces confusion, patterns emerge, history makes sense, outcomes stop looking random. And only then can real solutions even be discussed. Because ignorance of the system does not protect you from it, it only guarantees your confusion inside of it. This is The Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is The Open Eye. I guess we got to deal with a local issue here. Okay. And I want to thank Brother Hameen for posting on this. And I'm going to quote him a little bit here, paraphrase. And I'm going to go on with this. I'm seriously curious about the real reasons, the behind the scenes whispered in hallway reason. Why the state of Delaware is proposing to close the Plummer Community Correction Center in Wilmington, and they're going to do it in March of 2026. Because the official explanations, they still make no damn sense. What does make sense is what the state is refusing to do. Engage the community. No big surprise. No real public process. No transparent impact analysis. No listening sessions with the families, advocates, and formerly incarcerated people who actually understand re-entry. Just a quiet decision with loud consequences. Plummer sits exactly where it belongs, in the African American community, close to public transportation, employers, support services, and families. Re-entry only works when people can stay connected. Moving this facility downstate isn't about rehabilitation, it's about removal. It's about making families travel hours they can't afford. Making visitation a luxury and breaking the very bonds that reduce recidivism. And let me put a spotlight on something that should outrage anyone who claims to care about public safety. One of the counselors complained that an incarcerated black man at Plummer was severely overpaid. Overpaid for what? For securing legitimate employment that paid a livable wage? For doing exactly what the system claims it wants people to do? For lowering his odds of recidivism by being able to afford housing, transportation, food, and dignity. Severely overpaid. Let that sink in. A black man succeeds at reentry, plays by the rules, works hard, earns enough to survive, and instead of being celebrated as a model outcome, he's resented. Not because he failed, but because he earned too much. Because he disrupted the unspoken expectation that incarcerated and formerly incarcerated black men should remain cheap, desperate, and controllable. That right there tells you everything you need to know. This isn't about safety. This isn't about efficiency. This is about control. Now connect the dots. Closing the Plummer means relocating people downstate where work often looks like farm labor. Far from families, far from media scrutiny, far from community oversight. Cheap labor, limited access, reduced accountability. That's not accidental. That's structural. Work release in a sterile, culturally hostile environment where no community integration is designed to fail. And when it fails, the state won't blame policy, they'll blame the people. Same old goddamn script. So yeah, I sense shady politics at work here. Decisions made quietly. Black communities excluded deliberately. Successful outcomes treated as threats instead of proof that community-based re-entry works. If Delaware were serious about rehabilitation, it would expand Plummer, not close it. If it was serious about reducing recidivism, it would demand more livable wage placements, not complain when one actually happens. If it respected Wilmington's black community, it would never move forward without us at the table. History has trained us to recognize this pattern. Experience tells us what comes next if we stay silent. So ask the hard questions. Demand the data, follow the money, and don't let them sell regression as reform. It's the open eye. Yeah, that's about it, Brother Warren. Our so-called leaders made a deal. Believe that. WHGE 95.3 FM. Let me tell you, racism matters more than education. There was a moment in American history when the ruling class looked at the future and made a cold, calculated decision. Racism mattered more than education. Not just segregation, denial. When forced integration threatened white supremacy, they didn't reluctantly comply, they burned the bridge. They shut down entire public school systems rather than allow black children equal access to knowledge. Not for weeks, not for months, for years. This was not panic. This was not incompetence. This was counter-revolutionary policy. They understood something very clearly. Education creates power. Literacy creates resistance. Degrees create leverage. And black children, educated black children, were a threat to the racial and economic order. So they starved the system. They let black children sit idle, knowing full well that lost years of schooling would echo across generations. They calculated that educational death was preferable to racial equality. And when integration couldn't be fully stopped at the K through 12 level, they escalated. They moved the gate. College, once affordable to working people, was deliberately made unaffordable. Tuitions exploded. Student debt became normalized. Financial aid was reshaped. Admission standards were manipulated. Legacy preferences were protected. Public funding was gutted. Why? Because if black students gained access to higher education, they would gain access to professional power, economic independence, political influence, and institutional memory. And if denying that access meant sacrificing poor and working class white students too, that was a price the architects of inequality were more than willing to pay. And let that sink in. White supremacy has always been willing to harm white people as long as it harmed black people more. That's why the story of student debt isn't just an economic story, it's a racial one. It's a class control mechanism. It's a continuation of the same logic that shut down public schools rather than integrate them. This is why educational gaps do not appear, they're manufactured. This is why underfunded schools, overcrowded classrooms, crumbling buildings, and predatory loans follow black communities like a shadow. And this is why these histories are buried. Because once you understand that inequality was designed, once you see that ignorance was enforced by law, once you connect school closures to tuition hikes, redlining the debt traps, segregation to credential hoarding, you stop asking, what's wrong with them? And you start asking, who the hell did this? See, history matters. Especially the parts they fought hardest to hide. Especially the parts that prove this country chose hierarchy over humanity at every critical crossroad. And if you don't teach people what was stolen, you can pretend the theft never happened. And if you pretend nothing was stolen, you can call demands for justice entitlement. And that lie has been policy for generations. The desegregation of public schools in America has always been sold to African American families as liberation. But in practice, it functioned more like a cruel joke, one with devastating consequences for black children. The 1954 Brown versus Board of Education ruling declared segregation unconstitutional. Yet that decision was more symbolic than transformative. For decades after it, most school districts simply refused to comply. Some delayed openly, others compiled on paper while maintaining segregation in practice. They complied. In many places, meaningful desegregation didn't begin until the late 1960s or 70s. And even then, it was violently resisted. Boston in the 1970s erupted in riots, protests, and white mob violence over busing. And Delaware followed a similar path. These efforts were not peaceful transitions into shared opportunity. They were battlegrounds. White resentment, hostility, and institutional sabotage in the 1970s mirrored, sometimes exceeded, the resistance of the 1950 South. The myth that the North was somehow more enlightened collapsed the moment black children crossed invisible racial lines in the white schools. At the same time, many African American leaders, under immense pressure and operating in good faith, made a tragic strategic error. They confused quality with whiteness. They were persuaded that proximity to white students meant access to excellence. The logic seemed sound on the surface. White schools had better buildings, more textbooks, science labs, music programs, counselors, and extracurriculars. The assumption was that black children entered these spaces, they too would benefit from the same resources. What was underestimating, fatally, was racism's ability to adapt. Black students were not welcome into these schools as equals. They were surveilled, underestimated, isolated, and punished. Hostile white teachers tracked them into remedial programs regardless of their aptitude. Administrators weaponized discipline policies, guidance counselors discouraged college aspirations, school cultures were openly antagonistic. The goal was not integration. It was containment and failure. And in far too many cases, the system succeeded. Here in Delaware, the results were catastrophic. Dropout rates reached obscene levels. I hate calling them dropout rates and push-out rates. In one Wilmington district, for 2 consecutive years, the dropout rate hit 100%. Not one student graduated, not one. That is not an accident. That is not individual failure. That is a system working exactly as designed. Then, true educational justice was never about sitting next to white children. It was about ensuring black children had what they needed to thrive on their own terms, in environments that affirmed their humanity, intelligence, and potential. Until America is willing to confront that truth, school reform will remain what it has always been for black students: a promise deferred, a system rigged, and a stolen future. This is the open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM, your third eye optometrist, Patrice Gibbs here. Now, I know a lot of people hear what I just said. And I said, yup, okay. Dr. King did that. That integrationist stuff. Was Dr. King an integrationist? The short answer, yes. But not in the shallow way people usually mean it. Dr. King was an integrationist, but he was never a naive integrationist. He was not an assimilationist. And here's the crucial distinction that gets erased in mainstream retellings, often by some of our own people. What Dr. King meant by integration. For King, integration was about access to power, resources, and dignity, not proximity to white people. He defined integration as equal access to quality education, fair housing, economic opportunity, political power, shared control over institutions. King explicitly rejected the idea that simply sitting next to white people or attending white schools was liberation. Integration is not merely a romantic mixing of colors. It is the creation of a society where all can participate fully. That's paraphrased from King's writings and speeches. What King was not. He was not an assimilationist. King did not believe black people needed to imitate white culture, abandon black institutions, define success through whiteness. He valued black identity, culture, and institutions, and supported black self-determination within a just multiracial society. He was not obsessed with white acceptance. By the late 60s, King was openly critical of white moderates, white liberals, token integration that preserved economic inequality. He famously warned the white moderate is more devoted to order than to justice. That's from a letter from Birmingham jail. That is not the language of a man chasing white approval. King's evolution, integration plus power. As his thinking matured, King moved beyond civil rights into economic justice, labor organizing, anti-imperialism, anti-capitalist critique. By the time of the Poor People's Campaign, King was no longer talking about lunch counters. He was talking about guaranteed income, wealth redistribution, structural transformation of American society. That's not symbolic integration. That's systemic confrontation. And there is the lie America tells about King. America turned King into a colorblind mascot, a let's all get along soundbite, and a harmless dreamer. If he is harmless, they wouldn't have killed him. And we must recognize that we can't solve our problem now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. That statement alone disqualifies him from the watered-down integrationist label people like to use. The bottom line, yes, King believed in integration. No, he did not confuse integration with liberation. No, he did not worship whiteness. He demanded access, equity, and power. King didn't want black people let into the house. He wanted us to help redesign it. And that's the part they don't want to teach. This is open eye. Hey, Roger, I see you there, bro. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. Dope and I. Well, this past weekend brought news that I'm sure shocked Hollywood and the country at large. The legendary actor, director Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, were found stabbed to death in their Brentwood home in Los Angeles. Law enforcement is treating it as a double homicide, and Reiner's adult son has been arrested and charged in connection with their deaths. Reiner was more than just a household name. He was part of the fabric of American culture. From his role as meathead on All in the Family to his work directing Spinal Tap, The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men. His influence spanned generations. And then as the world tried to make sense of this tragedy, the Orange Disaster issued a social media post that was not sympathy, not condolence, but mockery. At the news of the murders broke, Trump chose to disparage Reiner with political insults, labeling him as suffering from Trump derangement syndrome and attacking his legacy. The low-life, this son of a bitch. That reaction wasn't just inappropriate, it was revolting to people across the political spectrum. Yeah. Nobody like that. What Trump's comments reveal isn't bravado. It shows you the moral void. There's a moment in America to unify in grief. They recognize the horror of familial violence and the honor of life that brought joy, insight, and empathy to millions. Instead, the choice was to turn a funeral into a political insult session, to prioritize partisanship over compassion. That's not leadership. It's not strength. That's cruelty as performance. Grief and tragedy should never be ammunition. There should be moments of reflection, humility, and human connection. Because no matter where you stand politically, we're talking about a family torn apart by violence, not a talking point. Dang. All right. Just moving right along here. Let me tell you something. This is according to data. It is much more likely that an ICE agent has an arrest record, has an arrest record than it is an immigrant. Let me read that again. Let me break that down again. It's more likely that an ICE agent has an arrest record than an immigrant. Because this single fact shatters the entire lie this country has been sold. For decades, America has been trained, conditioned to believe that immigrants are criminals, predators, invaders. That lie has been repeated so often, it's become policy. It affected budgets. And it gave out badges. It became a paramilitary agency whose primary function is not public safety, but state-sanctioned terror. And yet the data tells a different story. The men and women empowered to hunt, detain, brutalize, and deport are more likely to have criminal records than the people they are terrorizing. Assault, domestic violence, DUI, misconduct, abuse of authority, these are not outliers. They're patterns. ICE does not accidentally attract violent people, it recruits them. ICE is what happens when racism gets federal funding and cruelty gets a pension plan. This agency was not designed to keep anyone safe. It was designed to make certain communities live in fear. It exists to enforce a racial hierarchy under the disguise of law and order. And the American public has been lied to about who the real threat is. Immigrants actually work. They build, they raise families. They contribute more to the economy than they take. They commit crimes at lower rates than native-born citizens. That's not ideology, that's the reality. And how many of these ICE agents, like Brother Steve said, how many of these ICE agents are there because they done got a pardon from some of the crap they done did? Let that sink in. A badge does not cleanse a criminal past. A uniform does not turn violence into virtue. And just following orders has never survived history. And tell you something, ICE agents should understand something, that power has a habit of making people forget. Impunity is not immunity. History is not kind to those who carry out state violence and pretend they were neutral. We know how this story ends because we've seen it before, over and over again. Segregationists thought once the law was on their side. Slave catchers once believed their authority was permanent. COINTELPRO agents thought secrecy would protect them. They were all wrong. Files are being kept. Court cases are being built. Names are being documented. And the very communities being terrorized today will one day sit on juries, write laws, run courts, and shape the narrative. When that day comes, excuses will not matter. You don't get to terrorize families by day and hide behind a badge by night like you was in the Ku Klux Klan. Pensions can be revoked. Civil judgments can destroy careers. History books will not call you law enforcement. They will call you what you were, enforcers of cruelty in defense of a lie. And here's the part that really scares them. The American public is starting to see it. They see children crying in cages. They see dawn rays on marked vehicles and on marked vans. They see brutality dressed up as policy. And they're asking the question that destroys the entire narrative. If immigrants are the criminals, why do the enforcers keep getting arrested? To the communities under siege, you are not imagining this. You are witnessing organized state violence. And to the agents carrying it out, your past is not buried. Your actions will not be forgotten, and your authority is not eternal. History always collects its debts, and this one is coming soon, baby. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. All right, let's keep on moving. This is the Open Eye. All right, let me say it again for those on radio. Let's keep it moving. This is the Open Eye. And this is unacceptable. A black entrepreneur says Ameris Bank flagged and froze her accounts after a teller questioned her business. A black woman entrepreneur who went to renew a business debit card at Ameris Bank in Alpharetta, Georgia, walked out with a frozen bank account and a feeling she had just been racially profiled. More than a feeling. Now she and her attorney are demanding that the bank make it right. All right. In a 9-minute TikTok post, an exasperated Alexis Vaughn, who runs an insurance technology firm with her husband, Marvin Vaughn, explained that they went to the bank branch in Alpharetta the day before Thanksgiving to replace a debit card that wasn't working. The service she received from the teller for this routine request took much longer than usual and included odd inquiries. As she waited, the teller, who was white, and who I felt was disrespecting me, she looked me up and down, Vaughn said. Seemed to call the bank's corporate office to verify information about her account, including her balance. There was too much money there. Then the woman told Vaughn she had also looked up her business on the Georgia Secretary of State website. What the hell? Now, Vaughn been a customer at Atlantic-based Ameris Bank for 10 years and has 4 accounts, 2 business accounts, a personal account, and a trust account for her oldest son, according to the statement from her attorney. So they know who we are. All right? Y'all get it? All right. Let's talk about what this is really about. This story is not about a banking error. It's not about procedure. It's not about privacy. It's about white racial conditioning colliding with black economic reality. Alexis Vaughn didn't trigger suspicion because she did something wrong. She triggered suspicion because she violated an unspoken rule in white America. Black people are allowed to be customers, not owners, not wealthy, not financially powerful. The teller didn't freeze that account because paperwork was missing. She froze it because her brain could not reconcile a black woman plus casual attire plus large legitimate balance. That cognitive dissonance is racism. White supremacy trains people to see black wealth as stolen, fraudulent, temporary, criminal, or too good to be true. So when a black woman walks in calm, confident, unbothered, and financially secure, the system panics. This is economic racial profiling. The same mentality that redlined neighborhoods, denied black business loans, audited black taxpayers at higher rate, shut down Black Wall Street, and criminalized black success for centuries. The SOS flag wasn't about security. It was about control. Let's call it what it was, or what it is. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a bad experience. This was white discomfort with black wealth in real time. A black woman walked into a bank she'd been loyal to for 10 years, not asking for a loan, not asking for credit, not asking for permission, just asking for a replacement debit card. And suddenly, she's treated like a suspect. Why? Because somewhere in that teller's mind, a question started screaming, how does she have this much money? That's the sickness. White America is perfectly comfortable with black poverty. It knows how to navigate that. It knows how to pity, police, and exploit it. But black wealth? Oh, that makes them nervous. That makes them suspicious. That makes them reach for authority, flags, freezes, and excuses. Because black wealth threatens the lie. The lie that says we're irresponsible, we're incapable, we're dependent, we're inferior. Alexis Vaughn didn't just get racially profiled, she got economically challenged for existing outside of white expectations. And notice something else. She complied, she provided documents, she waited, she remained composed, and they still froze her account. Because racism doesn't stop once you prove legitimacy. Racism moves the goalposts. This is the same logic that said freedom, but don't educate them. Educate them, but don't let them vote. Let them vote, but don't let them own. Let them own, but don't let them accumulate. Let them accumulate, but don't let them relax. And when a black woman dares to relax in a pink sweatsuit, no less, that system short circuits. This is 1955 with better lighting. This is Jim Crow with customer service smile. This is racism wearing a name tag. And to a Marist bank saying, we do not engage in racial profiling. Your actions already testified under oath. You don't freeze money unless you think it doesn't belong there. You don't deactivate accounts unless you assume wrongdoing. And you don't question legitimacy unless you doubt humanity. And let me be clear, this isn't about one teller. This is about a culture that still believes black money needs white supervision. And here's the part they didn't plan for. This black woman didn't stay silent. She didn't shrink. She didn't accept humiliation. She went public. She lawyered up. She named it. She demanded consequences. And that's why they're scared. Because black wealth isn't just growing. It's no longer apologizing. Children of the sun understand this. They don't fear our poverty. They fear our independence. And they will keep showing us who they are every time they can't believe the money is ours. Stay woke. WHGE 95.3 FM. The Open Eye. Hey, brotherhood. Fannie Willis, you see her? You see her in that Georgia Senate hearing? Yeah. And let me tell you something. The actions were never about ethics, oversight, or fiscal responsibility. They were about containment. Fannie Willis, she represents the most dangerous figure imaginable to white political power in America. A highly educated, legally precise, confident black woman who understands the law better than the men attempting to interrogate her and refuses to perform submissiveness while doing so. That's the real crime. I mean, America has always been terrifying of intelligent black women. Not loud black women, not angry black women, smart black women. Because intelligence dismantles every stereotype white supremacy relies on. That black women are emotional, not rational. That black women are reactive, not strategic. That black women need supervision, not authority. And when those lies collapse, so does the hierarchy. So the state didn't call Fannie Willis to learn anything. They called her to humiliate her, bait her, and provoke a mistake. The same tactic used for centuries when black excellence becomes inconvenient. A dumbass question. That wasn't disrespect, it was accuracy. When Senator Greg Dolezal asked whether Willis somehow anticipated crimes that had not yet occurred, he wasn't asking a legitimate question, he was signaling something else entirely. We don't recognize your intelligence, your credentials, or your logic. That question wasn't stupid by accident. It was stupid on purpose, because stupid questions are the tools of dominance. They force the respondent to explain the obvious, defend reality, lower themselves intellectually. Fannie Willis refused by calling it what it was, as a dumbass question, a lie, and a factual impossibility. She shattered the unspoken rule that black women must absorb nonsense quietly to appear professional. And that's when the hearing went off the rails. When the script broke, the mask slipped. Once Willis stopped playing her assigned role, the room changed. Suddenly, her tone became the issue. Her anger became the spectacle. Her humanity became unprofessional. Yet one senator addressed the racial terror she described, the threats to her life, the swatting of her home. Not one senator, that's what I meant to say, not one senator addressed the swatting of her home, the racial slurs heard at her. Because acknowledging those facts would require admitting the truth. This was never about misconduct, it was retaliation. The double standard was the point. Let's not ignore the obscene irony here. A man who attempted to overturn a democratic election is treated as a victim. A prosecutor who pursued the law is treated as the criminal. And a black woman who refuses to cower becomes a circus. That inversion is not accidental. It's the operating system of white supremacy. They had to remove her. Fannie Willis wasn't removed because she was unethical. She was removed because she was unafraid, she was unmanageable, and she would not be intimidated. And she kept reminding them publicly that they were not the smartest people in the room. Power can't tolerate that, especially not from a black woman. See, this wasn't just about Fannie Willis. It was a message to every black woman watching. Step out of line and we will investigate you instead of the criminal. Speak plainly and we'll call you emotional. Expose our hypocrisy and we'll call you unprofessional. But it backfired. Because instead of shrinking, Willis exposed the rot. She forced the country to see what happens when a black woman refuses to perform fear. And the final truth, Fannie Willis didn't embarrass herself. She embarrassed the system. The system don't forgive that. And that's why educated, intelligent black women are treated as a threat in America, because they don't just survive oppression. They explain it, document it, and dismantle it in real time. That's dangerous. And that's exactly why she mattered. I'm Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is The Open Eye. Let me tell you about an unglorious end. When the Trump era finally ends, not with reconciliation, not with healing, platitudes, not with some manufactured moment of unity, the world will not mourn. It will celebrate his removal from history's stage the same way oppressed people always celebrate the fall of tyrants, with relief, clarity, and resolve. Because Trump was never misunderstood. He was never mischaracterized. He was never an accident. He was the most visible, most destructive figurehead white supremacy has produced in the modern era. A man who turned racism into policy, ignorance into ideology, and cruelty into entertainment. He did not hide the evil, he normalized it. He didn't dog whistle, he used a bullhorn. And let's be clear, his death or political extinction does not end the threat. It ends the distraction. Don't get it mixed. Trump serves as a cover, a loud, obscene carnival barker who allowed an entire movement of judges, legislators, donors, media figures, and what's the word I'm looking for here? Armed fantasies to operate behind the noise. While people argue about his personality, his foot soldiers dismantled democracy brick by brick. While the media obsessed over his vulgarity, his enablers rewrote laws, erased rights, and fortified minority rule. When he is gone, the work begins. There must be punishment. There must be punishment. Not symbolic rebukes, not book deals, not retirement packages, not we were just doing our jobs. Punishment for those who knowingly participated in corruption, voter suppression, racial terror, institutional sabotage, and open flirtation with fascism. History does not forgive collaborators because they hid behind procedure. And there must be social exile. Those who align themselves with this cowardly, incompetent would-be tyrant must not be allowed to quietly rebrand. No absolution for the I didn't know crowd. No rehabilitation tours for people who cheered while the public burned. You knew. You knew when children were caged. You knew when black voters were targeted. You knew when women lost bodily autonomy. You knew when political violence was encouraged and excused. And you knew when truth itself was declared the enemy. You knew. Claiming ignorance is not innocence. It's evidence of your moral rot. Consequences are not vindictive. They are deterrents. They're how a society proves that white supremacy is not merely distasteful, but disqualified. Not controversial, but criminal. Not an opinion, but a threat. Trump's rise proved his movement is real. Its reckoning must prove it's not survivable. The era that follows must be ruthless in its clarity. No more euphemisms, no more civility theater, No more pretending fascism is just another viewpoint. Trump will be remembered not as a strong man, but what he was truly. A weak, vanilla narcissist who exposed how many Americans were willing to trade democracy for dominance. And when he's finally gone, history will not ask how loudly he screamed. It will ask who enabled him, who benefited, and who stood against him when it mattered. That accounting is coming, and it must be unforgiving. Oh, where we at here? Oh. All right. Coming around to the close, and as always, I hope you learned something today. As I damn sure did before I ever sat behind this mic. And that's the whole point of the open eye. Not comfort, not convenience, but clarity. I don't do sound bites. I don't do selective memory. I don't do lies dressed up as patriotism. Deal in history, context, and truth, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Especially when it makes people uncomfortable. Because a closed mind is easy to control. An open eye is dangerous to the system built on deception. So take what you heard today and sit with it, question it, research it, talk about it, pass it on. Don't let anyone tell you that knowing your history is divisive or that demanding justice is radical. It's the open eye, speaking to the thinkers, the truth seekers, and the children of the sun. Keep your eyes open, your mind sharp, stay woke. And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority, who treat you as an option. This has been Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Thanks for joining us. Peace. All right. Don't think I forgot. Global African supremacy. The world was a better place when the black man ruled. Thanks for joining me. Peace.